alligator clips.
I love Whegs. Whegs are the coolest. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 269. 3D printed Flexure Whegs, El Cheapo bullet time, and a DIY cell phone sniffer. This week in Hackaday News, we have announced the winners of the Home Sweet Home Automation Contest. Let's see, the first three winners of this get a $150 gift certificate from DigiKey. Thanks, DigiKey. And the first three winners are, two of them are just insane, over-the-top home automation projects, which, you know, I definitely see why our judges picked them because, you know, they're both outrageously well documented. And the first one is a SCADA version, so it's like this industrial supervisory control and data acquisition thing. And because of that, it's got, you know, designed from the ground up to be collecting the data all the way. And then at the very top, there's this like fantastic display kind of aggregation of everything. And all of the different parts can interoperate and control each other. Just really super. The little lower level of it all is made with Arduinos and kind of normal stuff. It's not made with necessarily fancy commercial automation stuff, but it uses the kind of ideas and frameworks from commercial automation in a home system. And that's just really amazing. That was SCADA Smart Home by
Stefan Schnitzer.
And next up was a long-running project now, the Home Automation System by Bernard Kerkenere, which is kind of accumulated over the last 15 years. It's really pretty cool, but it's got a huge rack where everything's all patched together and et cetera, et cetera. It's got 30 sensors, 8 thermostats, 29 lights, 3 dimmers, 17 wall sockets, 6 blinds, 2 electronically locked doors, and a garage. Speakers, amplifiers, the whole darn thing. Like, I don't even think I have this much electronic stuff in my house, and he's got it all under control. And last, coming out of nowhere, is the world's cutest pill dispenser robot, which is just like in stark contrast to these other two, which are like super mega scale, is this little sweet pill dispenser robot from Marcus Bindhammer that just sits on your desk, smiles at you, and dispenses pills. Lovely. Just lovely. And we also got a bunch of miscellaneous projects in the honorable mentions categories, and they're all really sweet too. Smart ventilation, water heater automation. The hands-free chess clock is debatably home automation, but it's pretty awesome anyway. The judges loved it. It's a open CV chess clock, so you don't have to hit the button. It can tell when you've moved. And I guess if you play chess a lot in your house, that's home automation, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, some cool data aggregation ones and a underfloor heating controller, which would fit our retrofit category because the existing warm water underfloor heating system was not electronically controlled, and he's spliced this in to control all the valves and stuff and make it more efficient, but put it under central control. Pretty sweet, pretty sweet. So awesome stuff, really great, and I'm glad that 3 people got $150 gift certificates, and everybody else, really, really cool projects. And I know we featured even more of them on Hackaday. I think you picked one to talk about today, right?
I did.
So I won't say any more. What was your favorite out of the home automation? But you're going to talk about it soon anyway, so I'm not asking.
Well, I think my favorite was in the barely home automation category as well, and that was the pulley and counterweight operated window for cats and closed automatically. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that was really cool. Surprisingly, that did super well. That was actually highly rated by our judges. I can't remember if that came in like, you know, 4th or 5th, but it was definitely in the top 10.
Oh, fantastic.
So pretty funny. This is definitely the barely home automation category, but a really sweet hack nonetheless.
If you have that type of window, I mean, I'd like to have that type of window, but mine just go up and down.
Oh, I'll trade you. We have the side-to-side windows. I like the up and down windows.
Okay, I'll trade you. They don't leak, do they?
They don't particularly leak. No, that's true. Yeah, the up and down ones are really nice when you want to put something out the window. If you want to vent something out the window, the up and down ones are really nice because the side to side ones, you have to open the whole damn window.
Because you're making coffee in the bathroom, right? Or you're roasting
Correct.
coffee in the bathroom.
And this is exactly my pain point, is that I actually had to like cut out this gigantic piece of plywood that snug fits into the window frame and then cut a hole in it to put a vent out the window. Whereas when I was in DC, I just crack the window up a little bit, throw the tube out the window, lift it up that whatever 4 inches, throw the tube out the window, and you're done. Here it's like it's all or nothing, and all the smoke comes back in.
I just go outside. I don't know what I'm going to do in the winter. I mean, it's a warm process, but maybe I'll do it in the basement.
Yeah.
I'm doing it at the mouth of the garage now instead of the back deck because there's a wasp back there on the back deck building a mud dauber in our electrical outlet cover.
And they don't like the coffee, or they do like the coffee?
I'm afraid of the wasp.
Very good.
It's as simple as that.
Very, very good. The perils of coffee roasting, I tell you what.
You know what I'm gonna do next? In a complete 180. So I've been eating better too, and I have a new favorite food, and that food is freeze-dried strawberries. They're expensive, but apparently you can make your own if you have a styrofoam cooler and dry ice in 24 hours.
Oh.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anyone freeze drying their own whatever.
So that sounds exciting, doesn't it?
That does sound good. Is it so simple? You just throw them in there and you just throw in the dry ice and
That's what I hear. You're supposed to do a pound for pound. So like
okay.
Like around here we can get 5-pound blocks at the grocery store. So that's a lot of strawberries, but whatever. And you slice them up, you put them in a big thick freezer bag, and you stack them in your cooler and just put the dry ice on top. Put the lid on loosely so it doesn't explode, and wait, allegedly, and then you got your freezer-dried strawberries.
Hot diggity.
Yeah.
I never ever thought of how you would freeze dry something. That's weird. Why
Because
have
machines are expensive.
Yeah, right?
Let's find out.
Bonsai. Give it a try and report back.
I will.
Want to head on off to What's That Sound?
Well, sure.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
Let's go.
Got it all pulled up here. Oh. I can't remember. I don't know. The punching whatever sounds exactly like Fighting Force 64, but that's not what it is.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know.
I don't know what Fighting Force 64 is.
It's a decent game for the
Yeah.
N64.
Yeah. Should I tell you?
Sure.
It is.
Oh, okay.
I could see how you would think it was punching, though.
Wow, it sounds just like Fighting Force.
I wonder if that sound was taken from there. That's pretty funny. Anyway, for those of you listening out there, if you know what the sound is, then head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Under What's the Sound, you'll find a link to a form. Fill that out with your handle and your best guess and your email address. And we'll pick from among the right winners next week, and somebody will get a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
Dun 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 dun.
Dun, 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 dun. Without further ado, let's head on off to the hacks. I wanted to start off this week with a super hacky hack. This comes from P1 Security. Turn your Qualcomm phone or modem into cellular sniffer. This is a really sweet bit of security research tooling. It's basically an application you can run on your jailbreaked cell phone, and then it's got a Python script on your computer side. You hook the one to the other, and it lets you capture the raw 2G, 3G, 4G, and for some models 5G radio frames, and it pulls them across and saves them in a PCAP format so that you can look at them with Wireshark or whatever. And this makes use of the Qualcomm diagnostic protocol, which they refer to frequently as QCDM or just DM. And I think this is a fantastic piece of software/security research because It lets you monitor all of the traffic coming in and out of your phone. And I don't know about you, but I don't trust anything going on my cell phone. Like, I know that the company that makes the operating system that runs on my cell phone makes a lot of money by looking at people's location and selling it to people. And I know that they have gotten slapped down by a number of courts, both U.S. and European courts, for violating users' privacy without asking, et cetera, et cetera. So that alone is interesting. But then you think about all the sketchy apps you install on your phone. What are they doing? Like, there's all sorts of stuff. And, kind of more on a Hackaday bent, a lot of the time we'll install apps on the phone and part of a service that runs some other device you've got. Boy, you wish you could reverse engineer that when their cloud service goes belly up, right? And this lets you do PCAPs on that, even if it's not all, like before, if it was all internet traffic, of course, that's easy. But if they're doing other things with the more cell phone side of things, with the cellular modem or, with SMSs, the number of things you can look into with this are just outstanding. It's basically all of the kind of application level traffic that goes across your phone, you can have a peek at. And you absolutely should go. Both their GitHub has a ton of great examples, but then they've also got a write-up of how to use this over on their website. So check out the GitHub, pull down the software you want, but then go read their read-up. They have a bunch of simple examples that you can go through and figure out what's going on. Really, really interesting. Like, reading through that definitely pointed out that I don't understand cellular phone networking as well as I understand regular computer networking. There's like jargon and multiple letters and the whole darn thing. I don't know, just the various different ways in which a phone can communicate with its base station are outrageous. And I don't know enough about phone stuff to get too deep into it. It looks like if you wanted to start looking at things in the same kind of way we diagnose network traffic, pull up Wireshark and have a look at what packets are going across, this will let you do that, but for basically everything on a cell phone. And I think that's just really, really interesting. Oh, a lot of this doesn't work for every device yet, but their list is actually pretty good, and it includes like the Nexus 6P on one side. There's a bunch of phones by ZTE. I don't even know who they are. But then at the very bottom is the Samsung Galaxy S4, which is a great old phone. And those you can pick up on eBay for like $20 or so used. Yo, I've actually got one sitting here on my desk. So it's time to start installing the software just to see what you can see. It's the whole kit and caboodle. It's really neat. And if you want to poke into phone stuff, I think this is now a tool that you can't afford to overlook. Oh yeah, and before I leave the topic, I think a number of people in the comments thought that this was going to be a cell phone hacking tool that will let you eavesdrop on other people's cell phones in any way at all. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, it's working entirely locally on your radio, and I don't think it goes into like some kind of promiscuous mode or whatever. Some people raised legal concerns. I don't think this is that kind of phone sniffer. I think you are able to intercept all the traffic that goes across your phone, but that's your traffic anyway. So I think there's no legal or ethical issues here. I think this is purely a, hey, what the hell is my phone doing kind of sniffing. And that is, that's certainly something we can all get behind.
For my first hack, I chose This Is How a Pen Changed the World. A lofty title, if I do say so myself, but Primal Space shows us why that is probably true. Of all the things we take for granted, technology-wise, pens are pretty high on the list. But they're wonderful tools, and it's easy to see how they might have increased world literacy once they became dirt cheap. So Primal Space explores the history behind the pen leading up to the release of the Bic Cristal in 1950, a pen which has barely changed at all. First we had the quill, then the fountain pen, but those were leaky and skipped a lot at first. And then in 1888, American inventor John Loud came up with a ballpoint pen, but the thing would shred paper, making it almost useless for anything but leather and wood and things like that. When people tried to create a ballpoint, that would work, but the problem turned out to be the ink. It needed to be thicker, and that's where history was made by Laszlo Biro. But his pen cost too much for the average person, and it was French businessman Marcel Biche who was able to drastically drop the price of the pen by using a plastic body, among other things. The video goes into what some would consider a perfectly designed pen. It has 6 sides so as not to roll off the table. There's a small hole in this barrel to let air in, and so on. They have some really neat renders, which make it very interesting to watch. We got a lot of comments on this one.
It's hard to beat the straight up Bic roller pen.
Yeah.
It's cheap. It does exactly what it should. Boom. It's not the most, if you're a pen snob, it may not be the best pen.
Oh, I hate ballpoints entirely. Oh, did I say that out loud?
There's nothing wrong with that.
they're just not dark enough. I don't know. They're not something. I don't know. I don't like them.
Yeah.
Except for the Inkjoys. Inkjoys are pretty nice, I will admit.
Right on.
Paper-made Inkjoy.
Yeah, but I absolutely give you the advances in world literacy issue. That's actually really an interesting thought, is what effect does cheaper pens have on everyone's ability to write stuff? And yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Oh.
I agree.
I'm with you. I don't like them particularly. But you got to admit they get the job done.
Yeah, they do.
They do.
You know, I saw a copy of The Matrix on VHS and I should have bought it. It'll still be there when I go back. I'm pretty sure.
It's been there for the past 20-something years. It'll be there for the next. Well, thanks for giving away my next hack. It
Sorry.
is possibly the cheapest way to film in bullet time. This is a video by 3D Sage. Basically, he buys a whole bunch of cheap $10 video cameras, puts them together in a 3D printed circular rig, and has a go at it. One of the tricks to doing the bullet time effect, which you may remember from The Matrix, is you have a whole bunch of cameras in a ring, basically, or a semicircular arc that are all pointed at the same thing, and then you switch between them so you get these like changing viewpoints, and you could do it in slow motion and it looks super fancy. I think in The Matrix, actually, the ring wasn't even a simple semicircle, but it like went up in this kind of spirally pattern. And so you get this really crazy cameras going up and over Neo as he's like lying back kind of thing. Like it's really, really, really cool in the fancy Hollywood version. But this is, let's buy a whole bunch of $10 video cameras and see what we can do with it. And one thing you can't do with it very well is image synchronization, because they do have a photo mode, but it's really crappy. And so he had to just kind of use video on all of them and do video stills. But still, his trigger button mod didn't go to waste. He could start them and stop them all at the same time. Nonetheless, given the differences in the hardware and the exposures and the cheap optics and the everything else involved, nothing is going to be the same across the different cameras. And that means that there's got to be a bunch of post-processing. Actually, even worse, there was a timestamp on them all that he had to get rid of manually in all the frames because he couldn't figure out a way to turn that off. Boo. So where this project uses super cheap hardware, of course, it then has to rely on software. And he's using an AI program called Flow Frames to kind of interpolate between frames to make up for the fact that all of the cameras are not in sync with each other. And I have to say, it's pretty successful. I mean, given cheap and horrible input that he feeds into this thing, it's actually extremely successful. It's not going to stand up in a cinema, but it makes for a really cool effect. And I think that's pretty awesome. People did point out in the comments, and I noticed it too, that because of the AI blending from one camera to the next, there's actually a bunch of weird kind of janky imagined AI stuff going on in the background. And that's more or less disturbing, or it's really cool, depending on what your view is on the aesthetic here. Maybe it's awesome to have hallucinated bookshelves behind you. I don't know. Anyway, it's not the like super technical approach to the bullet time effect, but it's really cool to see it done. If you want to take the super technical approach, we've actually done a story back in 2020, Bullet Time on a Budget with the Raspberry Pi, which is really pretty good. And there they managed to get the synchronization down and do some of the image correction stuff that you need to do to undistort the lenses on wide angle cameras and, basically crop to the middle of it so that you use the less fisheye parts of the images, because that distortion when you go from camera to camera makes the image all jerky and funny, blurry in a way that you probably don't want if you're going for that like hyper clean matrix look. I just thought that was really cool, and I think it's really fun to see how far you can push the software side of things, even if you're starting off with crappy hardware. I think there's actually room still to work more on the software side. Like, one thing that 3D Sage didn't do was, work on correcting for the distortion that's in all the lenses. And I think you could probably do something with OpenCV or something to, actually calibrate the different cameras all out so that they had a similar white balance and a similar, you undistort the lenses mathematically and stuff like that. There's actually probably a bunch more smart pre-processing phases you could do here. And I'd love to see someone push that even further and see how kind of quote unquote technical and clean looking you could get something made on a bunch of $10 El Cheapo cameras. He does some pretty sweet bullet time of his cat.
Well, I gotta see this.
I thought you might enjoy it.
Playback speed 2.
I don't know where it is. You'll have to find out.
Aw.
See? George pipes up in the comments, who apparently worked on the rig they used, and they won all sorts of awards for that. It was, if you didn't see it at the time, it was groundbreaking, but it wasn't entirely original. This idea of taking simultaneous pictures from all sorts of different angles is actually even older than 100 years old. In fact, just about as old as photography itself. And there's a really great article we ran back in 2022 called "In a Way, 3D Scanning is Over a Century Old." And this documents Francois Wilhelm's 24-camera photo sculpture rig that he had set up in Paris and in London in 1861. And basically, he would take photos of you from 360 degrees and then use the silhouettes at all these different angles and then cut those into pieces of wood and then kind of put them all together radially to make a sculpture, which was a really weird approach to 3D modeling, but also captured this kind of same idea of, reconstructing a more 3D scene out of multiple different vantage points kind of stitched together at the same time. Really crazy. So this idea didn't come out of nowhere, but I will say it probably did see its apex in the Matrix.
Hey, you're making me want to go get that tape.
I think you absolutely should.
My next hack is 3D printed macro pad plate is Lego compatible. This comes from Josh Marinacci, who showed up in the comments and was surprised to see this on Hackaday. Good for you, Josh Marinacci, because building a keyboard should be easy, and what's easier and more fun than Lego? Making a 3D printed base for Lego, probably. And that's what's going on here. Josh Marinacci has printed a plate that serves a couple of purposes. It holds the switches and the microcontroller in place, making a PCB unnecessary, and it makes it so that Josh can build up an enclosure out of Lego. He even has a plan to Lego the keycaps by printing a little piece that is Cherry MX stem compatible on the underside and 2x2 Lego plate compatible on the top side. And I hope that we get to see pictures of that when it's finished, because that's going to be cool. It'd be interesting to type on too. I was going to say if you used flat tiles on top so you wouldn't feel the studs, but feeling the studs could be part of the fun.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that one of the coolest things to come out of 3D printing was the ability to make your own Lego tile compatible parts.
Oh yeah.
Before 3D printing, how did we even make our own custom Legos? And the answer is we didn't. Can you imagine such horrible dark days? I made all the forbidden Legos. Like I made Lego things that would go off at 45-degree angles, and
Heck yeah.
I made a 3-way Lego that it had, you could plug it in on the bottom, and then it had 2 male prongy parts going off at 60 degrees. So it was a 4x2 on the bottom, and then 2 going out the side. Like, you could make
Whoa.
hexagons. 3D printing and Lego are the best 2 things together. Well, speaking of cool things that 3D printing has enabled, my last one this week is 3D printed wheels passively transform to climb obstacles. And this is a research paper by Thomas Godden and al. And this is the coolest 3D printed small robot wheel you've ever seen. Oh, how long ago were Whegs? Man, maybe 15 years ago now, some people at Carnegie Mellon, I think, invented kind of soft wheel legs that were compliant and would go up over stairs a lot better than regular wheels because they were part wheel and part leg, and so they would kind of catch up on the stairs as they went up, and that's why they were called Whegs. The problem with Whegs, though, is that they're kind of bumpy when you drive on them on a flat surface, because the individual legs go thump, thump, thump. And, even if you have, the original Whegs had maybe 6 of them. They did some clever things where they had them out of phase with each other. So when one was high, the other was low, but still the thing would wobble around. That turns out to make it not just bumpy over flat surfaces, but also less efficient. It takes more energy to drive a certain speed/distance. And this is the solution to that. And it's the really coolest one. It has flexures in the wheels that then pop out to make little claws when it gets extra force in one point. They're round like wheels when they're on a flat surface, and then you have them try to go upstairs, and the part catches on the edge of the stair, and that pops out a little claw that then lets it climb up and over the stair. And this lets them get up over, I've forgotten what it is, but about 80% of the wheel's height. So it can climb up surfaces that are almost as tall as the wheel itself, because the little pop-out claw pops out. And then once it goes around, makes another revolution, it's one of these bistable flexure things. It gets flicked back into its round wheelie configuration and goes back to rolling. That's just really awesome, and it's completely passive. I guess we've seen systems before where, through having a bunch of servo motors in the wheels will unfold from like a wheel-like configuration to a kind of legged configuration. But this doesn't even have to do that. This just uses clever design and 3D printing to make the flexures and just does it auto-magically. And I think that's really sweet, completely passive. This is a really neat research paper, but what's really amazing is that it's only been out for a month or so, and already Cooper has a design up on Thingiverse of exactly these wheels for you to experiment with. So if you want to play around with this kind of cutting edge small robot wheel research, you can do so. And I think I'll throw the links for that model in the show notes here. But if that's all way too high tech for you, and or you don't have a 3D printer, I thought I would point out one of the other more random Whegs projects we've seen recently, which used star-shaped pool noodles as wheels. And so basically you just cut some sections of the pool noodles and put them on there. They have 5, quote, legs per wheel, but this one has the advantage that the wheels are also floaty pool noodles. So it makes a completely amphibious vehicle that can drive over rough terrain and then paddle wheel itself around on a lake if you happen to have one around. Summer's coming. You need something to drive around on the lake.
Oh, yeah.
Find yourself some star-shaped pool noodles and use them as wheels.
My next hack comes from R. Rustfold. Home Sweet Home Automation Spray Bottle Turret Silences Barking. This was an entry into our Home Sweet Home Automation contest. It didn't win any prizes, but it is cool nonetheless. It is one of my favorites. Right up there with the cat window pulley system with the counterweight. So, our Rustfold's dog barks when packages are delivered, or people pass by, or just whenever. So, this turret by the door aims to stop that, and it sprays water, but only when 2 conditions are met. It hears noise, like barking, and detects motion, like maybe overexcited tail wagging. So, the guts of this thing are a Raspberry Pi plus a thermal camera on the front, so it's also heat-seeking. But my favorite part is the actual spraying mechanism. There's a string wrapped around the trigger of the spray bottle, and that's connected to a pulley that gets turned by a DC motor. I'm not sure how I would have done it, but I don't know if I would have come up with that sort of situation.
Yeah, it's a pretty ridiculous contraption. Well, a couple people in the comments kind of pointed out that maybe this isn't the best way to train a dog, and you should try maybe positive reinforcement. Play with the dog, amuse the dog when it's not doing the wrong thing, and hopefully it'll do the wrong thing less. But I don't know. I certainly wouldn't want to get sprayed every time I bark.
I wouldn't either.
You know, humane or not, I think it's an awesome device.
Yeah. I thought about doing it for the cats, rigging up something when we have one cat that jumps onto the kitchen counters.
Yeah.
So, rigging something up for that, or maybe just putting I've heard just putting foil up there will deter them.
Because they don't like stepping on aluminum foil, or?
Yeah. I don't remember if it needs to be crunched up or not, but it just makes crunched up would hurt. It just makes the noise. They don't like it.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know what other situations I would need a spray bottle turret. If I ever did. All right, my first quick hack comes from Kevin Bates of Arduboy fame. This is Single Board Alpha, is a very stylish computer on a single PCB. This is a PCB with an ESP32 on it and a CapSense keyboard, which is really cool. It's also got a small screen, SD card, speaker, etc. I think he's running like an old DOS clone or something on it, which is kind of funny on its own right. But the keyboard PCB here is really the star of the show. Check it out if you're into DIY small portable form factor computers. Max Imagination. Tiny Arduino drone even has an FPV camera. This is a pretty straightforward multi-Wii based quadcopter, but it's really slick. It's a completely DIY one, but it's DIY in as far as it's made up of entirely standard modules you could buy and just kind of wire together. He's also got a nice 3D printed frame for it, but he also demonstrates how you can make the same frame out of popsicle sticks, and it's actually lighter and stronger. So, more work on your part, but the result may be worth it if you want it. If you think quadcopters are black magic and want to unblack magic it a little bit, this looks like a great project for you to follow. Next up, Hydrogen Time, simplest speaker oscillator, now even simpler. I guess last week sometime we had a, quote, oscillator that was made of a microphone, an old carbon microphone, and a speaker. And so you just put the speaker pointed at the microphone and it gets into a feedback loop, right? So it goes wee and it squeals. Hydrogen Time saw this and took up the challenge to make one even simpler, and does so by removing the microphone. This is just a speaker. He adds an extra wire to the speaker so that it effectively shorts itself out when the cone goes out to maximum extension. So he just plugs the speaker up to a battery, and it makes this absolutely horrible sounding squeal noise because every time, it hits the battery, so it throws the cone forward, and then it goes until it hits its end of travel, and it hits this little wire that then shorts it out, so it collapses back down, and then it gets kicked back out, and then it collapses back down. And that gives you an oscillator. And yeah, probably as simple as possible. I think you could maybe even replicate this with just like a loose wire that came undone when it went all the way out of travel. So is that simpler to not add a wire, but to break one? I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway, at the end of this video, Hydrogen Time heads the Hackaday comments off at the pass by saying, is this a hack? Yes, it is. And could it be done simpler with a 555 timer? No, it could not. Last up, Petteri Aimonen. Tiny prisms let you see what lies beneath a BGA chip. This is a really cute project. He just makes two 45-degree mirrors out of polishing acrylic at a 45-degree angle. One of them he shines light down, the other he looks into. It's kind of like a periscope underneath a ball grid array chip, and what it lets you do is see if the balls have bridged with each other anywhere. And so you look at it in the kind of X direction, and then you look at it in the Y direction. And if you see light between the balls in every different direction, you know you don't have any bridges. There are hyper expensive pieces of kit to do this with, fiber optic light setups and, fancy cameras and stuff that they use in industry. But this is, I think he cut up a CD case. It's like there's no way that this could be simpler or easier to make. So kudos to you, Petri, for making this quick and dirty BGA inspection rig.
My first quick hack comes from Caleb Holloway 08. Terminal Cyberdeck has looks to die for. And I say aesthetics go a really long way here. That red-black sort of crackly volcanic rock look is really cool. But the guts, as you might expect, are a Raspberry Pi 4, but as you might not expect, it's been slimmed down. It's on the Diet Pi program. Plus, there's a modified Pi Sugar power supply platform, and Caleb Holloway 08 modified the display. But if you want to do this yourself, they give pretty good instructions and or show you where you can find instructions to perform all of this surgery. Next up is Thomas Rinsma's Building a Mechanical Keyboard as a Learning Project. I think this is really nice for a first keyboard. I really dig the dual PCBs as an enclosure idea. It has a lot of nice features for a first build too. There's a rotary encoder, a 16x2 LCD screen, plus there's SK6812 RGB LED per key backlighting, and the whole thing just looks really nice. So good job, Thomas Rinsma. Next up is Hack and Style with this Fallout Cyberdeck. This comes from Eric B and KC9PSW. This doesn't just look like something from Fallout, it's relatively protected from a nuclear blast, at least the EMP part of things. And provided you keep it closed during the blast, everything inside should be protected between the conductive shell, layers of Faraday fabric, and the conductive paint insulation that seals any gaps. It also boasts quite the offline information library for those boring days on the new frontier.
Alright, it's time for our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week's installment is Al Williams's Upgrade Your Test Probes. And the behind-the-scenes view on this one is that Al was walking around in Harbor Freight and found these so-called back probes. Didn't know what they were, but they looked really cool, so he thought he would buy them and take them home. And he's found them useful. It's basically a little pin, either a straight one or a bent one, that then fits over in this case, I guess they fit into banana plugs and into your multimeter, but some other versions of this kit fit straight over the probe tips and give you these kind of microfine needles. I think you're supposed to use them by kind of widging them into the backs of connectors through the open part, and that's why they're called back probes. If you think of like a Molex connector, right? Maybe you have two Molexes plugged together, you can kind of wiggle them along the wire to fit into that like crimp sleeve and probe off of them. That's what they're there for. He asked us in our weekly staff meeting, hey, is this something you guys have seen before, or is this, am I the only person who doesn't know about back probes? And the rest of us were like, I've never heard of them. So he's like, okay, this is an article, and went on to write down both the fun he's been having with those and then look at some other kind of obscure probe tip extensions that he's found along the way. One of them is a wire piercing probe, which, I think it's debatable whether you want to do that too often in damp environments. But pinching through the insulation of your wires sounds dubious to me. But I guess if you need to do it, and there are like old phone linesman tap things that would do exactly that. They have like pins that would bite into wires in situ so you could tap into them. He also points out these alligator clip probe tips, which actually I have a pair of. I have more than a pair of. I have one in every color, and those I will absolutely swear by. Like when you want to put your multimeter probe on something, but then you run out of hands, These are little alligator clips that fit over the probe tips and let you just hold on to a wire. Absolutely fantastic. Turns out they come in all sorts of other varieties that I didn't know about. There are gripper tips and spade lug tips and all sorts of other funny things that he brings up here. And I think that's what's really cool about this, is just to think about, how often do you want to plug up a multimeter to a circuit? How often do you want to sit there holding it with both of your hands? And how often do you want to do something else with your hands at the time? And the answer is almost always to the latter. So, pluggy alligator clips, even those wire piercing probes, I guess. But, the other hooks and stuff, really fantastic.
I have a little pouch of probe extenders that I got from Radio Shack a rather long time ago.
What kind of probe extenders?
I would have to go get it, but they're definitely the hooky kinds.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go get it to be sure. I think there are magnetic ones.
Oh, yeah, he mentioned that
too.
in this. Yeah, I'd never heard of that either.
Yeah. I'll put a picture.
Oh, cool.
I'll take a picture.
Vintage Radio Shack probe tips.
Oh, yeah.
I have a janky arm thing that I use for kind of holding the probes down on things. That's really nice. But a lot of people mention in the comments, I don't know if you've seen the PC Byte system, but it's really pretty slick. And I've played with other people's PC Byte gear, and it's really, really sweet. It's basically just a probe it's on a gooseneck, and it's heavy enough that it falls down by itself. And so you kind of put it over where you want, and you just let it go, and it pokes itself into exactly where you want it, just under its own weight. Doesn't require any force, no springs, no nothing. You just put it there and it stays there, and those are actually really sweet. I think they're ridiculously overpriced, but pretty damn awesome. If you're doing it every day, if you're doing probe positioning, fine pitch probe positioning every day for work, they're probably easily worth it. But if you're like me and you do it once in a blue moon, more than once in a blue moon, but once or twice a month, you end up trying to put probes against small parts. Make do with something else. The worst I've ever done, oh my God, is to take a pair of pliers, you put the probe in the pliers, and then rubber band the handle, and then you can just kind of lean it up against whatever you need to lean it up against. It actually works surprisingly well in a pinch. And again, it's kind of that, let the weight do the work for you, kind of like the PC Byte system, but the low budget version of it. The expedient version of it. Worth a try if you're in that position.
For my can't miss, I chose Lewin Days. NASA is now tasked with developing a lunar time standard, relativity or not. This is essentially an unintentional part 2 to Lewin's article from the end of March, which I have linked in the show notes. Are they reading Hackaday? They.
Them, from there.
So if we're going to put people on the moon long term, we're going to need to establish time zones for the moon, right? Right. So in the first part, Lewin explores how time works on the moon in the first place and why we can't just slap a bunch of Earth time zones on it and call it good for these longer operations. We have to have time zones here on Earth because we like to sleep when it's dark and be active when it's not. But why do we need to establish time zones on the moon? If we're going to send people up there to live, they need to keep observing the 24-hour cycle of life or they will suffer, and their work will suffer. But also, lunar orbiting satellites are a distinct possibility, and those will require a steady time base that doesn't drift. And how does one go about this? Well, the moon's rotation is no help because it only rotates once every 29.5 Earth days, so the days and nights are both weeks long. Lewin takes this opportunity to point out that there really is no dark side of the moon, because it all gets sunlight eventually. He posits that groups might choose to align themselves with an Earth time zone and stick to that. The American astronauts might choose Central Time because of Houston, and so on. So that brings us to the present article. NASA has been tasked with setting up moon time by the end of 2026, which really doesn't seem like that much time. The problem is that time moves at a different pace on the moon, and it's not even a constant difference, which is bad for things like satellites, which, as I mentioned, need to be kept from drift. So also, coordinated lunar time must be traceable back to UTC for synchronization purposes here on Earth, So we'll probably end up with some kind of timekeeping device on the moon itself, a heartbeat device. Hopefully it'll be a big, cool clock like the one we have on Earth, but probably not. It's interesting, I think, that we're taking it upon ourselves to do this as a nation without input from other nations, really. But I guess NASA's pretty big, so I don't know.
I figure everyone else will help out when the time comes. But
Okay.
yeah, I think it's a crazy ambitious project to set up a new time base on the moon. Like, this is one of those things that, maintaining atomic clocks is kind of tricky. And there's going to be all of this like crazy temperature variation up over there. I'm surprised you can set up a spec for how you would hook up atomic clocks on the moon before you've actually tried it out. And I do not envy the folks at NIST who are probably going to get tasked with this, the NIST/NASA folks who are going to get tasked with this. I think it's not as easy as you think. My favorite part about this, and this is where time gets really strange, is that, of course, due to general relativistic effects, time moves differently depending on what kind of acceleration you're under or what kind of gravitational field you're in. And because the moon has less gravity, it's actually time passes faster. Identical clocks will run a little bit faster on the moon to the about 60 microseconds per day, which you're like, 60 microseconds, don't worry about it. But every day, and if you're going to try to do something like, a GPS satellite system for the moon, this is going to really matter, right? Because it's, knowing where those satellites are and knowing exactly what the time difference of what the time of flight is between the satellite and the ground station is what makes GPS work. So, 60 microseconds is no joke up there. So there's just no way you could use Earth time for time on the moon because the clocks will slip. So they absolutely need to run a clock up there. How they're gonna calibrate this time slip with respect to Earth time, I don't know. It's a good thing I'm not responsible for this. Like, they're really gonna have to measure this time difference and say, okay, at this day these two clocks are in sync, even though they're like 2 seconds apart by the speed of light round trip between them. Okay, at this point in time, we've synchronized these to the best of our ability. And then starting now, we're going to be losing this much time or gaining this much time on the moon relative to the Earth. That's a weird problem. And it's one of those problems that, of course, we've solved before, right? Like, again, our GPS satellites are so far up in the atmosphere that they experience gravity differently than we do down here on Earth. And so clocks at Earth's sea level run differently than clocks up in GPS satellites. And so this is a problem we know. This isn't terra incognita or anything. It's just weird to have to solve this problem. Why you have to worry about this. Crazy. I love that Lewin wrote this article and then 2 weeks later the White House puts out an order to say, hey, you guys got to figure this out. It's like, that's right. Lewin's like, hey, we should figure this out. And the White House is like, yeah, you guys got to figure this out. So thanks, Lewin. No, it must have been in the air. Lewin just picked up on it. So good on him either way. That wraps it up for this week's Hackaday Podcast. Thanks very much for listening. Head on over to hackaday.com/podcast for the links and to leave us comments. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, drop us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
Qualcomm Diagnostic.
And then I was inspired to get the VCR out.
Speaking of... Oh, sorry, go.
I was just going to say, hello, cutting room floor. Are you ready?
Hell yeah.
All right.
It was a plume of flame, 6 or 8 inches tall, melted aluminum everywhere.
All right. Do.